Picture the most beautiful building you have ever seen in your entire life. Marble columns, gold leaf on every surface that will hold it, fountains that shoot water 20 feet into the air, fed by an engineering system that took 30 years and hundreds of deaths to build. Gardens so perfectly manicured that the gardeners work through the night with candles to ensure not a single leaf falls out of place before morning. Now add the smell. Not a vague, distant, polite sort of smell. Not the kind you notice for a moment and then your brain adjusts and you stop perceiving it. I mean a smell that lives in the walls, a smell that has been building since 1661, when Louis XIV decided that the hunting lodge his father built in the marshy lowlands outside Paris wasn't grand enough for the most powerful king in Europe, and he decided to transform it into something the world had never seen and hasn't quite seen since. 23 years of construction, 40,000 workers at its peak, though not all of them volunteered for the work, between 10 and 30,000 deaths, depending on who's counting and whether they felt like counting the ones who didn't technically die on the building site, but definitely died because of it. The result? Versailles. 700 rooms, 67 staircases, 2,000 windows, the Hall of Mirrors, which runs for 240 feet and contains 357 mirrors arranged to reflect 17 arched windows looking out over the gardens, and when the sun is at the right angle in the afternoon, the whole thing blazes with a light that looks slightly supernatural, and that was entirely intentional, because Louis XIV called himself the Sun King, and he meant it, and he wanted you to feel it in your chest. Also, there are somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people living here at any given time, and almost no sewage system, and the sanitary facilities consist primarily of chamber pots emptied out of windows when nobody, particularly important, is walking underneath. That's Versailles in the 1680s, the most glorious, most powerful, most extravagant court in all of Europe. The place where every ambitious nobleman in France schemes and sacrifices and bankrupts himself, trying to get a foothold. The place where a single smile from the king could make your family's fortune, where a single frown could end it, where men have stood outside the king's private apartments for 6 years waiting for an audience, and they considered this a good use of their time. And yes, the thing about the toilet, we're getting to that, because it's real, it's documented, it's one of the most bizarre and illuminating facts about absolute monarchy that history has produced, and it tells you everything you need to know about how Louis XIV controlled his kingdom. He held official court audiences while sitting on his toilet, not euphemistically, not in some polite sense of the word. On an actual chaise percée, a padded armchair with a hole in the seat, and a porcelain chamber pot underneath, doing what all human beings do, looking out at a room full of the most important people in France and conducting the business of an empire. So I make these history sleep stories, and honestly, I have no real way of knowing whether you're listening to fall asleep or whether you're just one of those people who finds descriptions of 17th century French court hygiene and royal bathroom politics deeply calming. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable. Here we go. Your name is Jean-Baptiste de Fontenay. You are 22 years old, the second son of a moderately noble family from the Languedoc region in southern France. And you have been at Versailles for 31 days. 31 days is nothing. There are men who have been here 15 years and still haven't secured the appointment they came for. There are men who arrived as young and hopeful as you, and left as old and ruined as the furniture in the rooms they couldn't afford to rent properly. You are aware of this. You are trying not to think about it. You arrived in early October of 1685 with a letter of introduction from the Marquis de Cavaillon, your family's most powerful connection, a man who owes your father a favour of the financial variety, the kind of favour that gets paid back in letters rather than money. And that letter has gotten you precisely this far. A room, a set of rooms more precisely, though rooms is generous for what amounts to 3 connected spaces in the attic of the south wing, with a ceiling that slopes sharply enough that you can only stand upright in approximately the centre of each room, and a window that looks out not on the magnificent gardens, but on a service courtyard where the kitchen waste gets collected, and the smell of that courtyard is a permanent feature of your existence now, as constant and inescapable as the sound of horses and carriage wheels that begins around 4 in the morning and doesn't stop until well past midnight. The rooms cost you 80 livres a month. This is, objectively, an absurd amount of money for what they are. Back home in Languedoc, 80 livres a month would have kept a family of 4 in reasonable comfort. Here at Versailles, 80 livres a month gets you 3 slanted rooms, a window with a bad view, and the honour of telling people that yes, you do have apartments at the palace. That last part matters more than you'd like to admit. But right now it is 5 in the morning, and none of that matters because you haven't slept yet properly, because the family in the rooms directly above you, a minor viscount and his wife and their 2 children and their 3 servants, all crammed into what sounds like a space roughly comparable to yours, were up until past 3 in some kind of argument that you couldn't follow, because the Parisian accent is still sometimes difficult, and the walls are thin but not quite thin enough to make out individual words, just the general emotional content, which last night ran heavily toward distress. And before that, you couldn't sleep because you were going over and over the thing that happened yesterday, the thing with the Duc de Montmorency. We'll get to that. First, getting up. The candle on your small table has burned down to a stub. It gives barely enough light to see by, just a faint glow that makes the shadows move in the corners of the room. You've learned to sleep in your shirt and breeches because it's faster to dress in the morning, and also because the room is cold. October at Versailles is colder than October in Languedoc, and the fireplace in your rooms is small and inefficient, and wood costs money, and you're already worried about the money. Your valet Pierre is asleep on a narrow cot near the door. He's 17. He came with you from home, the son of one of your family's tenant farmers, and he looks perpetually alarmed, which is understandable because he's never been further from his village than the next town over, and now he's at Versailles, and Versailles is a lot for anyone. You don't wake him yet. He'll be up soon enough. You sit on the edge of your bed and try to organise your thoughts. This is a thing you've started doing in the mornings, organising. Because at Versailles, if you don't organise your thoughts before the day begins, the day will organise you instead, and usually not in a direction you want to go. Today is a Tuesday. The king rises at approximately 8:30, which means the lever ceremony, the elaborate ritual of the king's morning, will begin around 8, when the first gentlemen are admitted. If you want to be there, which you do, because being seen at the lever is important, being seen anywhere near the king is important, you need to be positioned and dressed and presentable well before 8, which means you need to start now. You stand. The wooden floor is cold under your feet. Your stockings are somewhere you think on the chair, yes, and the room smells of tallow candle and the faint sweetness of sweat, and beneath that, drifting up from the courtyard outside, the smell that has no polite name but that you've come to think of as simply Versailles, Versailles in the morning smells of horses and kitchen refuse and human waste from the countless chamber pots that get emptied before the main corridors fill up, and coal smoke from the fires that heat the main apartments, and underneath all of it, something that might be perfume if you catch it at the right angle, but that more likely is just the accumulated residue of thousands of gallons of expensive scent applied by people who are trying, as you are trying, to smell like something other than what they actually are. You pull on your stockings. The left one has a small tear near the ankle that you've been meaning to have mended and haven't had time for. You make a mental note and then immediately forget it, the way you forget all such small domestic details now because there is too much else to remember. Your coat is hanging on the door. It's your good coat. Deep blue, silver buttons, not extravagant but not embarrassing, and it needs brushing. Pierre will do that when he wakes. For now you carry it carefully and set it on the chair while you go to the basin. The water in the basin is cold. It was cold yesterday morning too, and the morning before. You ask Pierre to request hot water to be brought up. You're paying for a certain level of service with your rent. And Pierre asked, and someone promised, and so far nothing has materialized. This is also a Versailles experience. Things are promised constantly, things delivered occasionally. The gap between those two facts contains most of the frustration of court life. You splash cold water on your face. It's sharp enough to clear the sleeplessness from your eyes, at least temporarily. The cold hits the bridge of your nose and both cheeks at once, and for a moment it's just that. The cold, the wet, the breath coming back fast. And then it passes and you stand there dripping into the basin and you are a little more awake. You look at yourself in the small mirror and see someone who looks approximately like you but with shadows under his eyes and a tightness around his jaw that wasn't there 2 months ago. 31 days. You look like someone who's been here 31 years. You dry your face and begin the work of dressing properly. Dressing at Versailles is not casual. Dressing is a statement, a message, a performance. The wrong shade of coat in the wrong company reads as a social signal you might not have intended. The wrong wig, too plain for the occasion, too elaborate for your rank, can mark you as someone who doesn't know what they're doing, and at Versailles, not knowing what you're doing is as bad as doing something wrong intentionally. The result is the same. People talk, so you dress carefully. The clean shirt and the cravat tied correctly, the white linen falling in the prescribed fold, the breeches, the coat, the silver buttons done up one by one. The wig last, settled onto your head and adjusted in the mirror until the curls fall in the right arrangement. 40 minutes. This is not slow by Versailles standards. Pierre stirs when you're nearly finished. He opens his eyes, looks at you, and immediately sits up with the expression of someone who has just remembered where he is and isn't sure how to feel about it. Monsieur. Brush the coat, you say, and see about the hot water again today. Actually see about it. Don't just ask someone, find out which servant is responsible and speak directly to them. He nods. He won't find out which servant is responsible. He will ask someone, and that someone will promise, and the hot water will not arrive. But you say it anyway, because routine is important here. You leave him brushing the coat and step out into the corridor. The corridor at this hour is already busy, not busy by daytime standards. Daytime in the main corridors of Versailles is a constant river of humanity moving in both directions simultaneously, but busy in its early morning way. Servants carrying things, apprentice pages hurrying on errands, occasional courtiers in various states of dress moving toward or away from their appointments. A woman in an evening gown passes you going the other direction, her expression set in a careful neutrality that suggests either she's been awake all night or she's very good at looking as though she hasn't. You don't stare. You've learned not to stare. The palace sounds different at 5 in the morning. The ceiling heights here in the service corridors are lower than in the grand apartments, and the sound bounces differently, flatter, closer, more intimate. You can hear someone coughing in a room somewhere. You can hear the distant clash of kitchen work beginning far below, the bang of pots, a raised voice saying something sharp. You can hear your own footsteps on the stone floor, each one a small announcement of your presence. The walls here are not mirrored. They're not gilded. They're plastered and painted in a pale buff colour that someone once thought was elegant, and that has since acquired a patina of years and condensation and the proximity of too many bodies. In places the plaster has cracked. In one spot near the third turn of the corridor, there is a stain on the wall that you have decided firmly and permanently not to think about. You go down 2 flights of stairs and emerge into one of the outer corridors of the main block, the part of the palace where the real business happens. Here the ceilings soar. Here the floors are marble, cold and echoing. Here the walls are painted and gilded and hung with portraits of battles and allegories, men on horseback doing heroic things against dramatic skies, and somewhere in almost every painting, if you know to look for it, a face that resembles Louis XIV more than it resembles whoever is nominally depicted. The smell shifts here too. More beeswax from the candles, hundreds of them, some still lit from last night, guttering in their sconces, more perfume, and underneath, the ghost of the dinner that was served ere last night, because the grand's apartments double as dining spaces on occasion, and the smell of meat and sauce and wine gets into the curtains and the tapestries and stays there. You take a moment, just a breath, standing in the corridor. The marble floor is cold even through your shoes. The candlelight makes the gold on the ceiling flicker. This is the most beautiful place you've ever been in your life. It is also, you're increasingly certain, one of the most dangerous. And you need to understand why. To understand Versailles, the real Versailles, not the architecture lesson. You need to understand what it was built to do. And it wasn't built to be pretty. Or rather, it was built to be pretty as a means to an end. And the end was control. Louis XIV became king at the age of 4. 4 years old, he was technically the ruler of France before he knew how to read. For most of his childhood, the actual power was held by Cardinal Mazarin, his mother's chief minister, and then when Louis was 12, the Fronde happened. A series of revolts, partly by the nobility, partly by the Paris Parliament, partly by various factions who had decided that a child king was an opportunity to grab some power for themselves, and Louis spent months hiding, fleeing, disguised, dependent on the loyalty of people who might not be loyal. He nearly lost everything. He was humiliated repeatedly by men who were theoretically his subjects. He never forgot. When Mazarin died in 1661 and Louis took full personal control at 22, he announced that there would be no chief minister. He would govern himself. Every significant decision would go through him personally, and then he started building Versailles. Not just as a palace, as a system. This system worked like this. In order to have any influence at court, in order to have any hope of royal appointments, military commissions, pensions, privileges, you had to be at Versailles. You had to be physically present. And being present meant watching the king, being seen watching the king. being available to the king at any moment, because the king might notice you and speak to you. And that moment of royal attention was worth more than anything you could achieve by staying home and actually managing your estates. So the nobility came, and they kept coming, and they spent fortunes doing it, on the apartments, on the clothes that had to be renewed constantly, on the gambling that was effectively compulsory, because refusing to gamble with someone of higher rank was a social offence, on the food, on the servants you had to have to maintain any appearance of dignity. And while they were here, spending their money and watching each other instead of watching their lands, Louis governed. His ministers were bourgeois, not noble, not the great aristocratic families who had historically jostled for power. The great nobles were at Versailles, distracted, broke, dependent on royal favour for their income because they'd sold off the income from their estates to pay for their apartments. It was, if you step back far enough to appreciate it, a masterpiece of political engineering, not built with weapons, built with mirrors and marble and the intoxicating possibility of royal attention. You're caught in it right now, standing in this corridor at 5 a.m, in your good coat with the silver buttons, about to go and position yourself near the king's apartments so that someone important might see you and remember your name. You know this. You understand the mechanism even as you participate in it, and it makes no difference at all, because the alternative is to go home, to go back to Languedoc, to the family house with its respectable grounds and its tenant farmers and its complete lack of any future that looks like the one you're trying to build here. Second sons of minor noble families do not inherit. They find appointments, they find positions, they make themselves useful to the people who have power, and power is here in this palace, concentrated in one man who might, on a good day, on a lucky day, glance in your direction and say something. That's what you're here for. That's what everyone is here for. The corridor is getting busier. More footsteps, more voices, more people in various states of morning dress converging on the same general direction, toward the king's apartments, toward the lever. You join the flow. The Hall of Mirrors runs for 63 metres along the western face of the palace, and if you haven't walked through it in the early morning with only the sunrise coming in through those 17 great windows and reflecting into those 357 mirrors, you haven't quite understood what it is. Later in the day, it's busy, performative, full of people doing the complicated social dance of court life. At this hour, it's almost empty, and the light comes in cold and silver, and the reflections stack infinitely in both directions, and you see yourself, a small blue-coated figure repeated into the distance, getting smaller and smaller until you disappear. And there's something about that which feels appropriate. You don't linger, you keep walking. Ahead you can already see the gathering outside the king's apartments. A small crowd, men mostly, standing in the antechamber in their morning finery, the kind of waiting that looks casual and means anything but. There's an art to waiting at Versailles. You wait near the right people. You wait at the right angle. You wait in a way that communicates that you're not waiting desperately, that you could be somewhere else if you chose, that you are here out of loyalty and respect rather than naked ambition. Almost everyone here is here out of naked ambition. Nobody is fooled. But the performance of the alternative is mandatory. You take your position, not too close to the door. That's for the great lords, the ones whose rank entitles them to entry in the first or second entree. The intimate circle of the lever. Not too far back, that's for the nobody tier, the people who are here because the outer antechambers are technically public, and anyone in court dress can stand here and wait and hope. You position yourself in the middle ground, the zone that says, I belong here, I'm not overreaching, I'm exactly where someone of my modest but real significance ought to be. The man to your left is the Comte de Villarceau. You know him by sight now. You've made it a project, learning the faces and names of every significant person in the palace, working through it systematically the way a military officer memorizes a map. He's 40-something, well-connected, been at court since Louis was young. He's talking to a man you don't recognize, keeping his voice low, the kind of conversation that stops the moment anyone outside the immediate circle comes within hearing range. The man to your right is younger, maybe 25, in a coat of deep green that is probably one season behind the current fashion. He catches your eye and gives the small nod that acknowledges shared membership in the waiting near the King's Door fraternity, without committing to anything beyond that. You nod back. He looks at you. The quick assessment that everyone here performs constantly, the instant calculation of rank and usefulness and threat level. First time at the lever, he asks, low voice, conversational but private. 7th, you say. Something shifts slightly in his expression. Respect, maybe, or reassessment. 7 attendances at the lever is enough to mark you as serious rather than tourist. Bertrand de la Salle, he says, companion of the Dauphin's household. A real position, not a grand one, but a real one. The Dauphin's household is a functioning institution with actual duties and actual income, not just a title someone paid for. Jean-Baptiste de Fontenay, Languedoc. He nods, processes this, reads the same information you both know it contains. Minor family, provincial origin, no current appointment, which is why you're here. You've got the Marquis de Cavaillon's letter. Apparently everyone knows everyone's letter. Yes, good letter. Cavaillon's connected. Don't let him forget you exist. Men like him will forget you exist if you don't remind them. This is useful advice, offered without particular warmth but also without condescension. Just the practical information sharing of people who are fundamentally in similar positions. The thing with Morency yesterday, he says, quieter. Your stomach tightens. I heard about it, de la Salle says. Most people heard about it. At Versailles, most people hear about everything. It wasn't, I know what it was. It was bad timing and bad luck, and Morency has a temper like a wasp nest. It wasn't your fault. A pause. That doesn't mean it doesn't matter. No, it doesn't. Here's what happened with Morency. The Duc de Montmorency is 53 years old, and has been at Versailles for 28 of those years, and is, by most measures, one of the most influential men at court. Not because he's particularly intelligent, though he's not stupid, but because he's been here long enough that his connections form a kind of web that runs through half the appointments and decisions at court, and because he has cultivated, over 3 decades, the art of being useful to the people who matter. He also believes very strongly in the correct order of precedence at doorways. At Versailles there are rules about who walks through which doors first and in what order, and these rules are not suggestions, and they're not approximate guidelines, and they're not the kind of thing reasonable people can negotiate around on a practical basis. They are fixed and absolute and enforced with the same gravity that other societies apply to laws against murder, because in the logic of Versailles, violations of precedents are a kind of murder, a murder of the social order, an attack on the hierarchy, an implicit claim that the person in front of you is no better than you. Yesterday, in the corridor near the Salon d'Apollon, at a moment when you were still learning the specific rules of a specific doorway, you walked through a door approximately 2 seconds before the Duc de Montmorency. 2 seconds, because you didn't know. Because the door in question has a particular protocol that nobody had told you and that you had no reason to know about yet. Morency said nothing. That was worse than if he'd said something. He looked at you. The specific look, the one that every courtier here has seen and none of them wants to be on the receiving end of. The look that says, I have noted this, and I have noted you, and this will not be forgotten. And then he walked through the door, and that was that. Except it wasn't that, because the man who saw it, an abbé, someone in Morency's circle, talked. And now people know, in the way that everyone knows everything here within hours, that the new boy from Languedoc walked through a doorway ahead of the Duc de Montmorency. And you don't know yet whether this is a fatal error or just an embarrassing one. Those two categories are not as far apart as you'd like. It's not fatal, de La Salle says, as if reading your mind. Morency is prickly but not vindictive. He won't actively work against you, not for something this small. But you'll need to be careful. If you're seen by him again in the next week, make sure your deference is absolutely visible. Absolutely. No ambiguity. How do I do that without making it obvious that I'm doing it because of yesterday? He almost smiles. That's the skill, isn't it? A sound from inside the apartment. Movement. The door opens slightly and a man steps out and says something to the senior-most lord in the antechamber. The crowd shifts, reorganizes itself in the subtle way that crowds at Versailles reorganize without anyone explicitly directing them. Rank asserts itself. The great move closer, the lesser step back. You step back. De La Salle steps back beside you. Watch the door today, he says. You watch. The lever. Let me explain the lever. Every morning, Louis XIV wakes up in his state bedchamber, which is in the exact centre of the palace, positioned so that the rising sun comes in through the eastern windows and strikes the king's bed at first light. This is not accidental. Nothing at Versailles is accidental. The king is the sun. The bed is the centre of the universe. The whole palace is oriented around this room the way the solar system is oriented around the star at its centre. When the king wakes, his first gentleman of the bedchamber opens the bed curtains. This is a specific honour, given to a specific person, regulated down to the exact hand position required for drawing back the drape. Then begins the lever, the rising, a ceremony that will take approximately 90 minutes and involves somewhere between 30 and 150 people, depending on the day and the occasion, each person granted entry at a specific stage corresponding to their rank and their relationship with the king. The first entree, the king's children, his brother, a handful of the most intimate servants. They're admitted while the king is still in bed, before he has risen. They watch him wake up. This is not strange to them. This has always been how mornings work, because for Louis, every morning is a performance and every performance requires an audience. The second entree, more intimates. The Grand Chamberlain, the first gentleman. They're admitted as the king begins the process of getting up, and then, after several more entrees, each granting access to progressively more people, each stage corresponding to an action in the dressing process. Here is the king's shirt being presented. Here is the king's stockings being drawn on. Here is the king's coat. The ceremonial bedchamber opens to a larger audience, and this is where men of your rank might hope to be admitted if the stars align and your connections hold, and you haven't recently walked through a wrong door. What happens in there while the king dresses is government. People present petitions. People ask questions. People receive answers. The king speaks. Brief sentences, usually the famous laconic style that has been reported all over Europe. And those brief sentences become policy, become appointments, become deaths and fortunes and wars. His Majesty said 6 words to me this morning, you've heard men say, and they say it the way others might say, I won a fortune, or I defeated an enemy. 6 words from Louis XIV is a significant transaction. The door opens more fully now. The antechamber begins to empty as people are admitted by rank. You stay where you are. Today is not your day for admission to the bedchamber. You've calculated this carefully, or tried to. You're waiting for a particular opportunity, a particular moment when the Marquis de Cavaillon, your connection, your entry point, will be present and in a position to say your name to the right person. Cavaillon hasn't been at court this week. He's at his country estate until Thursday. And Thursday is the day you're pinning your hopes on, which means today you're here to be seen and positioned and present, rather than to actually do the thing you came here to do. This is Versailles. Most of your time here is spent preparing to do the thing, positioning to do the thing, waiting for the conditions to be right to do the thing, and then occasionally, if luck holds, doing the thing. The doing is a small fraction of the whole. You find a place to stand near the antechamber entrance. You're visible without being in the way. You can see who enters and who doesn't. Inside, and I should tell you about what inside looks like. The king's bedchamber is extraordinary, even by Versailles standards. The bed itself is behind a gilt balustrade, an actual railing like a small fence that separates the royal sleeping area from the watching area, because the king's bed is a sacred object, and there are rules about how close anyone can approach it at different times of day. The ceiling above the bed is painted. The canopy is embroidered. The whole room is rich to the point of almost becoming conceptual, the idea of richness given physical form. And in that room, every morning, a man in his mid-40s who has been doing this his entire adult life wakes up and performs the act of getting dressed for an audience of dozens. Louis XIV, at this point in his reign, is 47 years old. He is not tall, somewhere around 5'4", though his heels and his wigs add considerably to this, but he carries himself with an absolute certainty that makes height irrelevant. His face, at 47, has settled into the expression that portraits will capture for posterity. Dignity without softness, authority without anger. The look of a man who has never been uncertain about his own position in the universe because the entire world was organized, from his birth, to make that uncertainty impossible. He has been waking up to this ceremony since he was a child. He's been performing this particular piece of theatre, the conscious theatre, the theatre he understands as theatre, because Louis XIV is not naive about what he's doing. He created it. For 30 years. He's very good at it. Here's the thing about the lever that most accounts miss because they're too busy talking about the grandeur. It's also intimate, genuinely intimate. The men in the first entrees stand close enough to the king to smell him, to hear him clear his throat, to watch him scratch his chin while someone reads a letter aloud. The theatre is grand, but the proximity is close, and that intimacy is part of the point. Being allowed to see the king human, to see him in process, to see him before the full performance is assembled, that's the gift. That's what makes people fight over these positions. Not the gold, the human. You're not close enough for any of that yet, but you can imagine it. The antechamber is quieter now. Most of the principals have gone in. A few stragglers like yourself remain, waiting, positioned, performing the act of casual presence that everyone here performs. A page comes through the outer doors, 12 years old maybe, moving with the focused efficiency of someone who's been trained since birth for this environment, and hands a folded note to one of the gentlemen near the door. The gentleman opens it, reads it, and his expression doesn't change in any way visible to casual observation, but something in the set of his shoulders shifts slightly. You're learning to read those shifts. The morning proceeds. At 8:30, the full lever is completed, and the king emerges from his apartments into the outer chambers, and the antechambers fill with people pressing toward him and then giving way as he passes, the human sea dividing and reforming, and you get your best look of the morning at the man who controls your fate. He's wearing dark blue. His wig is the official morning wig. You've learned to distinguish the morning wig from the afternoon wig, which sounds like a joke but isn't. He walks with a particular gait that his old dance master taught him decades ago, the one that adds an inch of height and 3 inches of authority, each step deliberate and placed. He says something to the man immediately to his right, something brief, and the man inclines his head slightly and responds with 2 words. The king doesn't respond. He keeps walking. The audience has been granted and concluded in approximately 5 seconds. Then, and here is the moment you've been building toward, the thing that the document announces in such a matter-of-fact way that it barely seems strange until you actually think about it. The king turns toward the small cabinet to the left of the bedchamber entrance, the cabinet de la garde-robe. This is a small room, small by the standards of Versailles, which means it is still larger than the main room of your family home in Languedoc. It has a window, a chair, the specific chair, and that's essentially it for furniture. The decoration is appropriate to a room in the royal apartments. There's nothing about it from the outside that signals what it is or what happens there. But you know, you've been told. And now you watch as the king steps inside, and he doesn't close the door, and several men follow him in. Not everyone, not the full crowd. A specific group. Men who are currently discussing something with the king, or who have a petition that has been waiting for just this moment, or who hold the particular position that entitles them to this particular form of access. Because what happens now is this. The king sits. The king conducts his morning ablutions, and while he does, he continues to be the king. He continues to receive people. He continues to speak and listen and decide. And this, you realize, watching from the antechamber, is the thing that is both absurd and brilliant and deeply revealing about how this entire machine works. By making even the most private biological functions into a ceremony, Louis XIV eliminated private life. He turned everything into state. There is no Louis the man separate from Louis the king, because every moment of Louis's existence is a royal moment. There is no off-duty. There is no backstage. There is only the perpetual performance of monarchy, conducted so completely and for so long that the line between the performance and the performer has ceased to exist, and conversely, by making the toilet into an audience chamber, he created an honour, an access, something people competed for. Men would tell their grandchildren that they were received in the cabinet de la garde-robe. It went in letters. It was mentioned in memoirs. To be there, in that small room, in the intimate circle, was to be as close to the centre of power as it was possible to be in France in 1685. This is the specific genius of Louis XIV. He took something degrading and made it aspirational. He took something universal and human, we all have bodies, we all have functions we cannot skip, and alchemized it into political gold. You're trying to work out how to be in that room, not today, not this week, but eventually. That's the goal, if you can name it without sounding ridiculous. Eventually, you want to be someone who is invited into the cabinet de la garde-robe, not because of the room itself, because of what the room represents, because of who is in it, because of what can happen in the space of a short conversation while the most powerful man in Europe sits in his private chair and the morning light comes through the single window that can change the direction of a life. For now, you turn away from the doorway and go to find breakfast. Breakfast at Versailles is a complicated subject. The king himself eats breakfast alone. Officially, though alone means with about 40 people present, it's just that they're standing against the wall rather than sitting at the table, and the rest of the court eats when and where it can. There's no communal dining hall for courtiers of your rank. There are cafes and vendors in the courtyards. There's the option of having food brought up to your rooms by Pierre, which assumes you've either kept proper supplies or arranged a credit with one of the palace provisioners, which you've done, though the credit situation bears monitoring. You walk through the hall of the Aile de Boeuf, the bullseye, name for the oval window above it, which is one of the main waiting rooms outside the royal apartments, a large space where people collect in the mornings. At this hour, it's full of the specific type of morning energy that courts run on: information exchange, rumour, opportunity. A man near the window is telling a story to 3 others. You catch fragments. Louvois was furious, absolutely furious, and the king said nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just that particular silence of his. The story involves some ministerial quarrel that you don't have the context to follow, but you file it away anyway. At Versailles, you never know when a fragment of information will become relevant. Near the fireplace, 2 women are in conversation, both wives of significant lords, you think, though you've not sorted out the female hierarchy with quite the precision you've managed for the men. Women at Versailles are not less important than men. If anything, in certain types of social navigation, they're more important, because they have access to spaces and relationships that are closed to male courtiers. But that's not immediately relevant to you this morning. What's immediately relevant is food, and the question of how to spend the next 4 hours before the afternoon begins. You buy a roll from a vendor near the entrance to the courtyard. 2 sous, warm, with a crust that's been baked hard enough to stay good through the morning rush. You eat it walking, which is not what you'd do if you were trying to look your best. But hunger is a more pressing concern at this moment than impression management. The inner courtyard of Versailles in October is cold in a way that the corridors are not. The palace walls trap heat. The courtyards trap wind. Your breath fogs. Your coat is adequate, but not quite warm enough for standing still, which is another reason to keep moving. You eat your roll and think about the Montmorency problem. Here's the thing about social errors at Versailles. They have a half-life, but the half-life varies enormously depending on who's involved, what the nature of the error was, and crucially, what you do immediately after. A visible, gracious acknowledgement of error made promptly can actually improve your standing, because it demonstrates self-awareness and the ability to navigate the social codes. People respect that. An error that's ignored or compounded calcifies into a story, and stories at Versailles spread and stick and get told years after the event. You need to see Montmorency. Not today. Today is too soon. The sting is too fresh. But tomorrow, perhaps, or Wednesday. You need to put yourself in his vicinity and perform, with absolute clarity and zero ambiguity, the kind of deference that communicates, I know my error, I respect your rank, I'm not a threat. The difficulty is doing this without it being obvious that you're doing it because you made an error. Because doing the right thing obviously looks like weakness. Doing the right thing naturally looks like good manners. These are the calibrations Versailles demands. You finish your role, dust your hands, and head toward the gardens. The gardens of Versailles. If the palace is an argument for human achievement, the gardens are an argument that nature itself can be put to work in the service of a political idea. 350 acres of formal French garden, designed by André Le Naut to extend the palace's axis of power out into the landscape. Everything organised around the same principle as the building, the king at the centre, everything else radiating outward. The main axis runs west from the palace toward the horizon, perfectly straight, flanked by parterres, geometric flower beds, though beds doesn't quite capture the scale or the obsessive precision, and then by the bosquets, the enclosed garden rooms cut into the surrounding woodland, each one a separate world. Fountains, sculpture, hedges trimmed to precise right angles. In October, the gardens are past their summer peak. Many of the flowers are gone. Some of the fountains are already shut down for the season. The hydraulic system that runs them is a marvel of engineering and also a perpetual maintenance nightmare. And during winter, the pipes have a habit of freezing. But the basic structure is still magnificent. The long perspectives, the silvery October light falling across the gravel walks, the statues in their niches watching you pass with the unseeing confidence of stone. There are people walking. There always are. The gardens at Versailles function as a kind of outdoor extension of the court. This is where you take the conversations that can't be heard indoors, where you walk and talk and strategize, where the physical movement gives you a reason to have ended up beside the person you needed to have ended up beside. You're walking for a different reason this morning. You're walking because the inside of the palace, after 31 days, sometimes presses in, and the gardens offer something that the palace doesn't, which is a horizon, a sense of distance, the possibility that the world extends beyond this particular set of rooms as protocols. You take the main walk toward the basin of Latona. The gravel is damp under your shoes. The sound of it, that particular compressed crunch of wet gravel, is one of those details that gets into your memory and stays there. The basin of Latona is a multi-tiered fountain, not running at this time of year, depicting the goddess Latona and her children, Apollo and Diana, being tormented by peasants who've been turned into frogs by Jupiter. Right now it's a stone bowl of still water with dead leaves floating on the surface. A crow is sitting on the rim, looking at its reflection with what appears to be professional interest. You stop beside the basin and look back at the palace. From here, from this distance, the full scale of it lands differently than when you're inside it. The facade stretches across the horizon, the whole length of it visible, the central block and the wings extending north and south, the gold ornaments of the roof line catching the weak October sun. How many windows? Too many to count from here. And behind those windows, this moment, 10,000 people in various states of ambition, desire, fear, and calculation. Behind one specific window right now, the king is conducting his morning audiences from his private chair. You don't yet know who's in that room, but you will. By this afternoon, the information will have worked its way through the palace's information network, who was admitted, what was discussed, what the king said or didn't say to which person. The network is informal and rapid and remarkably reliable, powered by servants who hear everything and report it to their employers, and valets who hear things their employers don't realise are audible, and the ladies who have access to the Queen's apartments and who trade in information the way the merchants at the Bourse trade in currency. You know a few people in this network, not many yet. 31 days is not enough to have built a real intelligence network, but you're working on it. The crow lifts off from the basin rim and flaps away. You turn and walk back toward the palace. Here's what you need to understand about the Cabinet de la Garde-robe, the room you were watching this morning, the toilet audience that is the most famous and least understood ritual of Louis XIV's court. It was not unusual. That's the first thing. From our perspective, from the outside, the idea of conducting political business while sitting on a chamber pot seems like a bizarre eccentricity. But in the 17th century, the body was not private the way we've come to think of it. Noble bodies were attended by servants at every stage of their function. Waking, sleeping, dressing, undressing, eating. All of these happened in the presence of other people. All were regulated by protocol. None was truly solitary. The Cabinet de la Garde-robe was just the logical extension of this principle. If your whole life is performed, why would this one biological function be exempt? The second thing, it was brief. We tend to imagine it as a long, leisurely audience, perhaps because the image is inherently comic and comedy benefits from duration. But it was usually a short encounter, 5-10 minutes at most. The king did not linger. He was not idle. The men who were admitted used those minutes for specific purposes. A petition that needed a quiet setting, a brief conversation that couldn't happen in the public chambers, a question that required the king to be in a relaxed and unhurried state. The third thing, and this is the part that matters most, the king chose. He chose who was admitted. Not to every audience. Some people had formal right of entry, but the informal admissions, the ones that signalled favour rather than just protocol, those were chosen. If you were called to attend the king and his cabinet, you knew it meant something. You knew you'd been noticed. This is why men competed for it. Back inside the palace, it's past 9 now, and the character of the corridors has changed. More people, more noise, more of the specific Versailles energy that builds through the morning. A secretary is hurrying somewhere with a sheaf of papers. 2 abbés are in quiet conversation near a window, their black robes making them look like a pair of roosting ravens. A group of young men, your age, roughly, similarly positioned, all performing the same casual purposefulness that marks the person who belongs here without belonging here, are talking near one of the doorways, and one of them glances at you as you pass. You give nothing, neutral, moving with purpose. This is how you walk here. A page intercepts you just past the Salon d'Abondance. Monsieur de Fontenay? You stop. He hands you a note. Folded paper, sealed with wax, your name in a handwriting you don't recognise. You don't open it immediately. Opening notes immediately suggest they might surprise you. You tuck it into your coat pocket and continue walking until you've turned a corner and are in a quieter stretch of corridor. Then you open it. The note is from De La Salle. Morency will be at the Salon d'Hercule at 2 o'clock this afternoon. He'll be playing cards with Chamilly and the young Soissons. If you need to make your case, that's the room. Come and watch. Don't play unless asked. Useful. Genuinely useful. De La Salle doesn't know you well enough to like you. You've known him for approximately 2 hours. This is just how things work here. Information is currency, and giving someone useful information creates a small obligation, and small obligations accumulate into relationships, and relationships are the architecture of power. 2 o'clock, that gives you several hours. There's a man you've been meaning to speak with, the Abbé Fortin, who is the secretary to the Bishop of Chartres, and who is connected to one of the Dauphin's tutors, and who has been at Versailles long enough to know where every body is buried, both literally and figuratively. You met him twice briefly in the first 2 weeks, and he gave you the specific polite attention that suggests mild interest not yet converted to any form of commitment. You go to find him. Finding someone at Versailles who isn't in a fixed location is a tracking exercise that involves understanding their routine, their connections, and the geography of their day. Fortin is a morning man. You know this because de la Salle mentioned it once in passing, meaning he does his most important socializing before noon. He's likely to be in one of 3 places: the chapel corridor, where the ecclesiastical contingent tends to cluster, the library, which is sometimes available for informal meetings, or the apartments of Madame de Guise, whose household he's connected to through the bishop. You try the chapel corridor first. The chapel corridor at this hour has the particular smell of incense and stone that cathedrals develop over centuries, compressed into a more modest space. 2 women in widow's dress are coming out. A small group of clerics is moving toward the entrance. And there, near one of the windows, looking at a printed sheet with the concentration of someone who is actually reading it, rather than performing the act of reading it, is the Abbé Fortin. He's 50-something. Round face. The kind of eyes that look pleasant and miss nothing. He's wearing clean black robes and holds the printed sheet at arm's length in the manner of a man who needs spectacles and hasn't admitted it yet. You approach at the correct angle and speed. Abbé Fortin. He looks up, processes you. The recognition takes a moment, 2 brief meetings some weeks ago, and then lands. Monsieur de Fontenay. The fact that he remembered the name is worth noting. I hope I'm not disturbing your reading. He folds the sheet and tucks it away. You are, but pleasantly. I was trying to follow an argument about church property rights that I find less interesting the more I understand it. Are you a student of church law? No, Abbé, though I've some acquaintance with the topic. A slight exaggeration. You have almost no acquaintance with church law. But a slight exaggeration said with confidence is usually adequate as a conversation opener. He looks at you with those eyes that miss nothing. He sees the exaggeration. He doesn't call it out. You've been here a month, he says, not a question. A little more. With the Marquis de Cavaillon's letter. Again, everyone knows the letter. Yes, knows the... And have you found your footing? The question is layered. It's asking, have you made your essential contacts, found your essential allies, understood your essential position here? It's also asking, are you someone worth investing time in, or are you still at the stage where you don't know what you don't know? I'm finding it, you say. There have been navigational difficulties. You mean Montmorency. He knows you mean Montmorency, because he's already heard. Doorways are important at this court, he says mildly. I've learned this. The Duc de Montmorency entered the service of the late Queen as a gentleman of the bedchamber in 1657. He's been arguing about precedence at doorways for 28 years. He's not going to stop because of one incident with the new arrival. I know, but the incident should be corrected, yes. You're handling it? This afternoon. I'm hoping to. He nods slowly. Good. The question is not whether you made the error. Everyone makes errors at the beginning. The question is whether you understand the system well enough to correct it gracefully. Graceful correction suggests intelligence. Intelligence is what people invest in. He pauses, looks out the window at the chapel courtyard. I knew a man, this was 12 years ago, who made a worse error than yours in his second week. Worse, much. He recovered from it. He's now the first secretary to the Minister of Finance. How? The abbé looks at you with something that might be approval. He made himself indispensable to 3 different people before anyone had decided he was worth resenting. By the time the person he'd offended tried to act against him, there were too many other people who would have been inconvenienced by his removal. Indispensable to 3 different people. You file this. It's the most useful thing anyone has said to you in 31 days. Cavaillon comes back Thursday, Fortin says. I know. When he does, don't wait for him to remember you exist. That was the advice of someone, I'm sure. He's correct. Cavaillon is a good man, but a distracted one. He has 14 people currently waiting for his assistance, and he's going to help the ones who remind him most recently that they need it. Be that person. I intend to. Good. He picks up the folded paper again. I should return to this. Property rights won't ignore themselves. Of course. Thank you, Abbé. I didn't do anything. But the way he says it suggests he knows he did. You leave the chapel corridor and walk back toward the main apartments. The morning is doing what mornings at Versailles always do, which is moving faster than it seems like it should. It's nearly 11 now. The palace has reached its midday density. The public hours, when people of more modest rank and even members of the public with appropriate dress can be present in certain spaces. You find a place to stand near the antechamber entrance again, watching the flow of people. This is something you do now, watching, cataloguing, building the map. Versailles has 1,000 rooms and you've been in perhaps 60. The geography of the place is itself a kind of knowledge, a kind of power. Knowing which corridor connects to which salon, which staircase the ministers use, where the king's path runs during the apartment evenings. This is the information that takes years to accumulate and that separates the courtier who belongs from the courtier who looks like he belongs. In the antechamber, an exchange is happening between a gentleman and a page that you can't hear, but that you can read by posture alone, the page delivering information, the gentleman receiving it with controlled surprise, the small recalibration that follows, the information network at work. You watch it and think about what you'd need to know to understand what just passed between them. Probably something from the cabinet, something that came out of that small room this morning and is now beginning its journey through the body of the court, moving from person to person, each telling reshaping it slightly in the retelling, until by this evening it will be a slightly different story than it was this morning, and by tomorrow a different story still. This is the other thing about the toilet audiences. The information that came out of them travelled. The king said something to a man in a small room, and that something was overheard by the second attendant and passed to his employer at breakfast, and mentioned at a card game at noon, and discussed at dinner, and reported by letter to a duke in Lyon, who received it 3 days later, and who made a decision based on it that affected 20,000 people. That's how power moves in this world, not through proclamations, through rooms. The afternoon starts at 2. At 2 o'clock you enter the Salon d'Hercule, which is one of the grand reception rooms in the north wing, and you do it correctly, at the correct pace, with the correct degree of presence. The room is large and richly painted, Hercules ascending to Olympus on the ceiling, the kind of ceiling that takes years to complete and that most people stop actively seeing within 2 weeks of arrival, and several small groups are engaged in the specific, aristocratic leisure that fills the afternoons here. In the far corner, 3 men are seated at a card table. The Duc de Montmorency, the Comte de Chamilly, and a young man you take to be the young Soissons that de la Salle mentioned, 20-something, fashionably dressed, bored expression worn like an accessory. You don't approach directly, you circulate. You pause to exchange brief words with a man you've met once. You look at a painting. You let the room do its natural mixing, and in the natural mixing you come to rest in the general vicinity of the card table. Cards at Versailles. I need to explain the card situation. Louis XIV loves cards. More than loves. Gambling at cards is one of the defining features of court life here, regulated and formalised to such a degree that there's an official gambling table set up in the Grand's apartments 3 times a week, and the king sits at it, and everyone plays, and the stakes are real, and losing money at the king's table is entirely possible, and considered something of a compliment, because it means you were at the table. The unofficial games, like the one in the Salon d'Hercule, happen at any hour in any room, whenever 3 or more people decide they'd rather lose money than stand around performing boredom. Basset, lansquenet, ombre. The games of the period, fast, gambling forward, not much concerned with skill, but very much concerned with nerve. Morency, you've heard, plays with controlled aggression. He doesn't bluff extravagantly. He doesn't lose his temper when he loses. He just applies steady pressure until other players make mistakes. You stand within visible range of the table, but not so close as to intrude. Chamelie glances at you. Fontenay, he says. Just the name. Morency looks up. Here is the moment. You incline your head. Not deeply. That would be an exaggeration. An obvious performance. Just the exact right angle. The one that says, I respect your rank and I acknowledge the incident of yesterday without drawing explicit attention to it, because drawing explicit attention to it would make it larger than it is. Monsieur le Duc, you say. He looks at you for a moment, reads the inclination of your head the way you meant it to be read. Fontenay, he says. Just a name. Flat, but not hostile. Not hostile is good. Will you play? Chamelie asks. You look at Morency. If Monsieur le Duc doesn't object to a 4th, you say, the direct deference, asking his permission even though technically no permission is required, acknowledging without stating that his comfort at the table matters more than the formal rules of invitation. Morency looks at you for a long moment. Then he makes a gesture. Small, dismissive, but permissive. Don't lose too much, he says. Inexperienced players slow the game. It's not warm. It's not forgiveness. But it's a seat at the table and an acknowledgement of your existence. And at Versailles in October of 1685, that is enough for now. You sit. They're playing basset, which is a fast game of luck rather than strategy. You're not a skilled gambler, but you don't need to be skilled at basset. You need to be present and watchful and capable of losing a reasonable amount of money without visible distress. The stakes are higher than you'd like. Not ruinous for the other 3, but noticeable for you. You play carefully. You lose the first hand, which is fine. You win the second by luck, which you receive with the expression of mild surprise rather than triumph. The money changes hands rapidly. The young Soissons is down significantly already and doesn't seem to care. Chamelie is up slightly. The small, precise wins of someone playing more with attention than luck. Morency is even, which is probably exactly where he wants to be. After half an hour, during a pause between hands, Morency says, without looking up from the cards he's sorting, You're from Languedoc? Yes, Monsieur le Duc, the Fontenay estate, near Narbonne. I know Narbonne, hot in summer. Considerably. He says nothing further, but the conversation has happened. Your existence has been registered in a neutral key rather than a negative one. After yesterday, neutral is excellent. Neutral is the foundation on which you can build. By 4 o'clock you've lost 40 livres, which stings, and you've established that Morency is willing to be in the same room as you without obvious hostility, which is worth 40 livres. You make your excuses. You have an errand, which is true. You need to write a letter to your family, and you remove yourself from the game gracefully. Morency doesn't watch you leave. This is exactly right. Outside the Salon d'Hercule, the corridor is late afternoon busy. The light through the western windows is already going golden, which means it's past 4:30, and the cycle of the court day is rotating toward evening. Late afternoon is when people return to their apartments to change into evening dress. Evening is when the public entertainments happen. Concerts, theatrical performances, sometimes more gambling, the King's own entertainment, which is called the Appartement and runs 3 times a week. Tonight is an apartment night. You've attended twice before and done it adequately without doing it brilliantly. You'll attend again tonight. But first, your rooms, your letter, and an attempt at something that resembles preparation. The corridor smells, at this hour, of candle smoke, and the dinner preparations beginning in whatever kitchen serves the wing you're in. Food smells at Versailles are complicated. The quantity of food required to feed 10,000 people a day creates a permanent culinary atmosphere in the service areas, a rolling mix of boiling and roasting and baking that changes with the hour. At this time of day it's the first wave of substantial cooking. Meat, stock, the deep fatty warmth of something being braised. Your stomach responds before your mind catches up. You haven't eaten properly since the roll this morning. You've been too busy performing the act of being here to actually take care of the body that's here. This is a thing that happens at Versailles. You forget to eat. Pierre will have something in the rooms, you think, you hope, the stairs, the corridor of your wing, the turn to the left and then the door. Your rooms, when you enter them, smell of tallow and the service courtyard and faintly the wood smoke from the small fire Pierre has lit. He's gotten better at the fire. He was terrible at it in the first week. The wood wouldn't catch and the room stayed cold, but now he's figured it out, and the fire is small but real, and the room temperature is marginally better than outside. Pierre himself is at the small desk in the corner, mending one of your shirts with the focused frown of someone doing a task he's been taught, rather than one he does naturally. He looks up when you enter. "The hot water came," he says. "This sounds like news because it is news. Good." You move toward the fire. Hold your hands out toward the modest warmth. The heat reaches you in waves, uneven, closer, warmer. Further, the cold still present. Your fingers ache slightly from holding the cards and from the general chill of the palace's stone corridors. You flex them slowly. "What's for supper?" "There's bread and some cheese, and the apples you bought at the market. I could get something from the vendors in the courtyard." The bread and cheese is fine. You sit at the table and Pierre brings the food, plain bread, a piece of hard cheese, 2 of the apples. You eat with the appetite of someone who's been too busy to eat since morning, which is all the appetite in the world. The cheese is sharp and slightly salty, and your teeth bite through the bread and the resistance of it, the hard crust giving way to the denser interior, is one of the most satisfying physical sensations you've had today. And you think about tomorrow. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Cavaillon comes back on Thursday. Between now and Thursday, you need to have done everything that makes Thursday's conversation as effective as it can possibly be. You need to have made 3 specific contacts who can speak well of you. You need to have not committed any additional social infractions. You need to have positioned yourself through the lever and the afternoon circuits as someone who is present and purposeful and noticed in the right ways. 31 days of work building toward one conversation. Let me tell you about what Thursday's conversation will need to accomplish, and why it matters enough to have driven you across the length of France in a jolting carriage with your 17-year-old valet, to spend 80 livres a month on 3 slanted rooms, to lose 40 livres at cards to a man who stepped on your ambitions because of a doorway. Your father. He's a man of modest estates and considerable dignity, the kind of person who manages the gap between what he has and what's expected of him through sheer force of manner. He has 3 sons. The eldest will inherit. The youngest has entered the church. You are the middle, which in practical terms means you're the one whose future was left open, and open futures are the ones that require construction. What your family needs, what specifically could change things, is a position, an appointment, something that comes with a salary and a title, and the official recognition of the crown that the Fontenay family exists and matters. Not a great appointment, not a ministry or a generalship, a captaincy maybe in a suitable regiment, or a position in one of the royal household, not the king's, that's not realistic, but the dauphin's or one of the princes. Something with a salary and a context and the ability to say, I have a position at court. Cavillon's connection is to the Marquis de Louvois, who is the Minister of War. Louvois controls regimental commissions. Cavillon owes your father something. If Cavillon speaks to Louvois, and Louvois is in a position to accommodate a request, and the request is framed as a small thing requiring little effort, a minor commission for a well-connected young man with suitable family background, this might happen. It might. The might is what everything here is built on. You finish your bread and cheese and open the letter from your mother that arrived last week, the one you've been carrying in your coat pocket but not quite opening. You know what's in it, in general. The news from home, the inquiry about your progress, the careful not asking whether you're going to run out of money before something happens. She writes well, your mother, better than most women of her class, because she was educated by an unusual aunt who believed women should be able to read serious things, and the habit took. The letter describes the autumn harvest, which was adequate. Your brother's wife is expecting. One of the tenant farms had a fire, not serious. Everyone was fine. At the end, carefully, not at the beginning. Your father says the situation regarding the Montpellier obligation can wait until spring, but spring is not so far. The Montpellier obligation is a debt, not a ruinous one, not yet, but real. And spring is indeed not so far. You fold the letter. Write. Thursday. You write the letter to your family. It takes you an hour because every sentence requires calibration between honesty and reassurance, and because you're tired and the calibration is harder when you're tired. You tell them you've established yourself in the essential social circuits. You tell them about Cavillon's return and your planned conversation. You tell them you're in good health. You don't tell them about Morency's doorway or the 40 livres at cards. Pierre takes the letter to the palace's postal arrangements, and you have 40 minutes before you need to dress for the apartment. You lie down on your bed. You don't sleep. You won't sleep. You haven't properly slept since you arrived because the quality of your sleep here is different than it was at home. Shallower, more alert. The way prey animals sleep when they sense they might be in a landscape that contains predators. But you lie still and let your body rest while your mind continues its work. Think about the lever. Think about the cabinet de la garde-robe. The Abbé de Choisy, who wrote memoirs that will not be published in your lifetime, describes attending the king's morning audiences this way. The king sat in his chair and received people as naturally as you might sit by a fire. The chamber pot beneath him as unremarkable as any other piece of furniture. Men presented their business. The king listened or didn't listen. The king spoke or didn't speak. And all of this happened while the most powerful man in Europe attended to his body's morning requirements. And the men in that room, the ones who were received, who were present, who stood before the chaise percée and made their case or offered their compliment or simply made themselves visible, those men went out into the court afterward with something. Not a favour, not yet, maybe never, but a proximity, a reality. They had been in that room. They'd been received in that intimacy. And that reality was worth something in the world of Versailles, where everything else was performance, and this, strangely, paradoxically, was real. You understand this now in a way that you didn't 31 days ago when you read it in the letter a friend of your father's sent you before you left. The letter that described the court in general terms and mentioned the toilet audiences as an amusing detail. It's not an amusing detail. It's the centre of the thing. The toilet audience is what the whole Baroque apparatus of Versailles generates toward. Like a river system that appears to have 100 tributaries, but all of it eventually feeds into a single channel. If you are ever admitted to that room, and that's a considerable if and a long time from now, you will have arrived somewhere, not at the destination, but in the proximity of it. For now, dress and go to the apartment. The apartment happens 3 evenings a week, in the Grand's apartments, the staterooms of the North Wing, the series of rooms named after planets and gods. The Salon de Venus, the Salon de Diane, the Salon de Mars, each one a stage set. Marble floors, painted ceilings, the light of hundreds of candles in chandeliers that have to be lowered by ropes each day to be lit and then raised back up. On apartment evenings, these rooms are open to the court and filled with entertainments. Music in one room, gaming tables in another, billiards in a third, dancing in the fourth. The king moves through the rooms. He stops here and there. He speaks to people. He watches the dancing. He plays billiards sometimes, and everyone watches him watch. This is the performance of court life in its most concentrated form. Everyone is there to be seen, and the one person whose sight matters is circulating through the rooms, and the calculation is constant. Am I positioned correctly? Is the distance right? If he looks in this direction, will he see me? Will he see me and remember who I am? You enter the Salon de Venus at 7 o'clock and survey the room with the practised eye you've been developing. The room is full. It's always full. The light is extraordinary. Dozens of candles, the mirrors multiplying them, the whole space gold and warm in a way that makes everyone look better than they are, which is certainly intentional, because no one looks their best in clear daylight after 3 weeks of inadequate sleep and expensive anxiety. You see De La Salle near the billiard table talking to someone. You see Chamelet from this afternoon's card game, now wearing a coat of darker blue, in conversation with 2 women. You see people you recognise and people you don't, and the general impression of a court at its evening best, performing leisured pleasure with varying degrees of skill. The king is not yet in this room. You can tell by the specific quality of everyone's attention. When the king is present, there's a slight magnetic north to the room, everyone subtly oriented toward the same point. Right now, the room is multi-directional, which means he's elsewhere. You circulate. You speak to 3 people briefly. You accept a cup of something that turns out to be a rather good wine from the Languedoc. your own region, you note with an internal amusement you don't externalize. You move through the space with the unhurried purpose that is your constant project. In the Salon de Mars there's music, a small ensemble in one corner playing a sarabande, slow and formal, the kind of music that creates a gentle pressure toward quiet. Around the edges of the room, people are listening, or performing the act of listening while actually talking. A woman you haven't met approaches you. She's 40 or so, well dressed, with the kind of face that has been navigating this court for long enough to have developed a distinct economy of expression. "You're from the Cavaillon letter," she says, not unkindly, just direct. "I am Jean-Baptiste de Fontenay. I know, I'm the Vicomtesse de Bréal. My husband served with your father's cousin in Flanders 17 years ago." A pause. "He mentioned it might be useful if I knew you were here. Your father's cousin. You search your memory. There's a cousin in the military. You know this. Someone who served in the campaigns. You've never met him." "I appreciate it," you say carefully. She looks at you the way the Abbé Fortin looked at you this morning, sizing up, precise, without hostility but also without any unnecessary warmth. "I'll be honest with you, because I find honesty saves everyone time. You're positioned reasonably for someone in your situation. The Cavaillon letter is worth something. The incident with Morency yesterday was clumsy but not fatal, and I hear you handled the follow-up well today." How does she know about this afternoon? The answer is, because at Versailles there is no not knowing. Events become information within hours. "I'm trying to learn the terrain quickly," you say. "The terrain shifts. That's the thing about this place. Just when you think you've learned it, the king says something to someone and the whole map rearranges itself. What you need is not just a position in the landscape, but a position with people who can tell you when the landscape is moving." She names 3 people. Not casually. Each name delivered with the weight of a specific suggestion. Those 3 are well placed and relatively reliable, and they all have reason to be interested in someone connected to the Cavaillon circle. Not a guarantee, but worth the conversation. "Why are you telling me this?" She gives him the expression of someone who expected the question. "Because your father's cousin did something for my husband a long time ago. Because I have a memory for those things. And because at my stage of life at this court, the most useful thing I can do is help someone who might do something useful in return someday. And a young man from Languedoc with a reasonable letter and no obvious fatal flaws is a better investment than someone with more access and less character. Character. It's a word people use differently here than elsewhere. Elsewhere it means moral quality. Here it means legibility. Can your motives be understood? Are your reactions predictable? Do you behave like someone who can be trusted in the specific Versailles sense of trust, which is not about honesty, but about consistency? "Thank you," you say. "Don't thank me. Use it or don't." She looks across the room towards something you can't see. "The king will be through in 20 minutes. Stand somewhere useful. Not near the billiards. He doesn't like being watched when he plays. Near the doors to the next salon to his right. That's the direction he usually turns." She moves away. You stand for a moment, recalibrating. 3 names, a specific location, detailed information about the king's movement patterns in this room. You go to where she said. Near the doors to the next salon to his right. You wait. This is the thing about court life. You spend a lot of time waiting. Not idle, not passive, but actively waiting. Waiting in a way that does work, that builds something, that positions you for the moment when the waiting pays off. The waiting is the job. The king enters the Salon de Mars at approximately the time the Vicomtesse predicted. He enters with his customary entourage, never quite alone, always attended, always in the specific formation of king and court that has become as natural as the formation of planets around a star. He moves through the room with that deliberate gait, and the room reorganizes around him without appearing to. You watch from your position. You don't try to catch his eye. That would be wrong. You simply exist in his sightline, correctly dressed, correctly present, correctly doing nothing except being there. He passes you at approximately 3 feet. 3 feet is remarkably close to the most powerful man in France. You can see his wig in detail, the formal evening wig, the curls falling past his shoulders. You can see the order of the Saint-Esprit on his coat, the blue ribbon and the jewelled cross. You can see in profile the face that is on every coin and every official painting, and that somehow still looks slightly different in person. More human, more mortal, more like a man who has been carrying the weight of absolute sovereignty for 50 years and has the face to show for it. He doesn't look at you. He speaks to the man beside him briefly. He pauses near a group of ladies and says something that makes them laugh. Just a small laugh. The genuine brief laugh of people who are surprised into it rather than performing amusement. Then he moves on toward the next salon. He didn't look at you, but you were there. You were in the right place at the right time, correctly present. And the machine of being present at court requires this kind of repetition, this kind of patient investment of presence before it pays off. You stay in the apartment for another hour and a half. You speak to 2 of the 3 names the Vicomtesse gave you, managing brief, functional conversations that accomplish the minimum and leave doors open. You watch the card games, you watch the dancing, you watch the room perform itself. At 10:30 the king withdraws. This is the signal. The apartment doesn't immediately empty. People linger, games continue, but the gravitational centre is gone and the room knows it. You leave. The corridor back toward your wing is cold and dark except for the candles in their sconces, widely spaced enough that the light barely overlaps. Your breath fogs. Your shoes are loud on the marble. You think about the cabinet de la garde-robe and what happens there. Actually, let me tell you specifically what it was like, because the historical record is more detailed than you might expect. The chaise percée, the Pierce chair, was a piece of furniture that would be unremarkable in most houses of the period. A padded chair with a cushioned seat, and beneath the cushion, a hole, and beneath the hole, a porcelain chamber pot. Not so different from what most people used, the difference being the quality of the padding and the formality of the surrounding ceremony. In the royal apartment at Versailles, this chair sat in a small cabinet off the main bedchamber, and the king would retire to it after his public lever for a period that documents variously describe as brief or quite extended, depending on the day and the business at hand. He kept documents in the cabinet, reading material, petitions, the ordinary paperwork of kingship. He was attended by whoever was serving in the specific role for the morning, and men came to him there, not in crowds, never in crowds, the space was too small, but specifically, individually, with specific business, or simply with the desire to have had this audience, which was private in a way that the lever was not, intimate in a way that the formal chambers never quite were, and marked by the particular odd equality of the situation, the king reduced, temporarily, symbolically, to the same physical contingency as everyone else. Saint-Simon, the great memoirist of this court, describes it with his usual mix of documentation and acid judgment. He describes watching men compete for this access, men who genuinely wanted it, Men who told each other about having been received there, who recounted it in letters, who built it into their social portfolios as a proof of standing. The French monarchy had, over centuries, progressively absorbed the private life of the king into the public function of the crown. By Louis XIV's time, there was essentially no private life left. Everything was ceremony. Everything was state. The toilet was simply the last frontier of this principle, the one remaining bodily function that other monarchies treated as genuinely private, that Louis had colonized for the state, that he had turned from a vulnerability into a resource, because to receive someone in that room was to give them something real, not performed, not the public theatre of the lever where everyone watched everyone. A moment of actual proximity in a setting so stripped of grandeur that the power had nowhere to hide, and so the power was nakedly visible, and the intimacy was genuine, and the conversation that happened there was different from any conversation that happened anywhere else. When men came to petition the king and his cabinet, they came as men. The elaborate ritual of court precedence didn't quite reach that small room. Not entirely. You still bowed. You still used the correct forms. But the distance that ceremony creates was compressed, and something human happened that the architecture of the grand apartments was specifically designed to prevent. Louis XIV understood this. He designed it this way. He knew that too much ceremony creates too much distance, and too much distance makes rule impersonal, and impersonal rule generates resentment, and resentment generates the fronde, and the fronde is what happens when a 12-year-old king doesn't control his nobles. The cabinet de la garde-robe was the pressure valve, the human moment, the proof that the king was a man, which paradoxically reinforced rather than undermined his monarchy, because it made him legible in a way that pure performance couldn't achieve. You've been thinking about this for 31 days, and tonight, walking back to your slanted rooms in the attic of the south wing, you realize something has shifted. Not the position, not the appointment, not any of the concrete things you came here to achieve. Those are as uncertain as they were when you arrived. But the understanding, the map of the place is clarified. The Abbé Fortin's conversation, the Vicomtesse de Bréhel's names, the card game with Morency, the position by the door during the apartment. 31 days ago, Versailles was a machine you didn't understand, operating on principles you hadn't learned, doing things whose purpose you couldn't decipher. Tonight, it still isn't yours, and it may never be yours in the way you hoped, but you understand the mechanism. You see how it moves. You can see where to stand. That's something. That's actually quite a lot. Your rooms. Pierre asleep. The fire down to coals but still throwing a little heat. The window looking out on the service courtyard, where right now a cart is being loaded with kitchen waste by 2 men who work through the night because the palace never stops. You sit at the small table and don't light a candle. The moonlight is adequate. The sounds from the courtyard below are the sounds of people doing their work in the dark, the ordinary mechanical work of keeping this extraordinary machine fed and clean and functional. There are kitchen maids who wake at 3 in the morning. There are scullery workers who finish at midnight. There are lamplighters and night soil men and servants of servants, and all of them together, all 10,000 of them, are the thing that makes Versailles possible. The audience for the performance, the machinery behind the set. You think about Louis XIV and his morning, right now, actually right now, tonight, in this palace. The king is sleeping in his state bedchamber in the exact centre of the building. The first gentleman is in the antechamber. The candles are out except for a few kept burning through the night. In the cabinet nearby, The chaise percée sits with its cushioned seat and its porcelain pot, waiting for morning. Tomorrow morning the lever will begin again at 8:30. The same ceremony, the same ritual, the same progression of entrees admitting progressively more people to the king's presence, the same half-hour in the small cabinet, and tomorrow, or the day after, or Thursday when Cavaillon returns, or some day in some week or month that you can't yet see, but that you're working toward, you will be in that room. Not yet, but the trajectory is real. You lie down. The mattress receives you. The ceiling above you is plain plaster with a water stain in one corner that you've been looking at for 31 nights now, and which has acquired, over those nights, the particular familiarity of something that was unpleasant once and is now simply yours. The sound of the palace at this hour is a low register of horses and distant voices and the structural sounds of the building itself. Old wood settling, wind working at the window frames, the vast complicated mechanics of a place built too quickly by too many people on marshy ground that was never quite right for it. In the room above you, the family's quiet tonight. No arguing, just the ordinary breathing of people asleep. Beyond your window, the gardens are dark. The fountains are off. The carefully trimmed hedges stand in their correct shapes in the moonlight, geometric and still. The proof that even nature here has been made to serve the idea of the king, and tomorrow the sun will rise from the east, as it was designed to, as everything here was designed to, and the light will come through the 17 windows of the Hall of Mirrors and multiply itself into 357, and the whole gold palace will wake up again to perform another day of the longest-running production in French history. You let your body do what bodies do at the end of long days. The ache in your feet from the walking, the particular tiredness in your eyes from the constant social calculation, the tension in your shoulders that you've been carrying since the Morency incident, all of it starts to unlock slowly, the way a fist unclenches one finger at a time. This is not a gentle place. This place will find every weakness and apply pressure to it with the precision of a craftsman. It will empty your purse and your patience and your certainty, and it will offer you in return the possibility of proximity to power, the chance, slender and real, to stand in a small room beside the most powerful man in the world and say a sentence that might change everything. Men have chased that chance their whole lives. You've been chasing it for 31 days. Thursday. Sleep comes for you around midnight, coming in from the edges of your consciousness the way the tide comes in, slowly and then all at once. The last thing you're aware of is the distant sound of a palace clock marking the hour, and beneath it, so quiet you might be imagining it, the sound of horses' hooves somewhere outside. A late carriage, someone arriving or departing at this unlikely hour, someone whose business doesn't respect the time of night. Versailles never quite sleeps, but you do. Wednesday comes in cold, the kind of cold that gets into the service corridors and stays there, the stone walls holding the chill from the night through the warmest part of the afternoon. You wake to frost on the inside of the window glass. Not much, just a thin crystalline edge around the corners of the panes, and to Pierre already up, rebuilding the fire with the quiet efficiency he's developed over the past weeks. Your body is stiff from the bed. The mattress is adequate but not forgiving, and 31 days of sleeping on it have given you a precise knowledge of which positions result in which kinds of morning complaint. You move carefully, rolling onto your back first and then sitting up, the cold air of the room hitting your face with the particular rudeness of October mornings. when the fire hasn't had time to push back the chill. "Hot water today?" you ask. I went down to the kitchen directly, like you said. The boy there, he said it would come within the hour. Progress. You've learned that the key to getting hot water in this palace is understanding which specific person in the kitchen service hierarchy is responsible for the service corridor assignments, and speaking to that person rather than leaving a request with whoever answers first. The system works through direct contact. Everyone in this palace works through direct contact. The people who get things done are the people who know which human being to speak to, not which office to address. You dress while the fire builds and the room very gradually, reluctantly warms. Wednesday is a different kind of day than Tuesday. There's no lever on Wednesdays. The ceremony happens only on days when the king is in residence and in formal schedule, and Wednesdays are often lighter. Which means the antechambers will be less crowded, which means the opportunities for the kind of strategic positioning you've been doing will be different. Different, you've learned, is not worse. It's just a different kind of work. The hot water arrives 40 minutes after Pierre's request, which is effectively miraculous by recent standards. You wash properly. Not just the face splash of recent mornings, but actual washing, the neck and hands and the face with soap. The small luxury of hot water on skin that's been cold for too long. The simple physical pleasure of it is something you'd forgotten about, or rather that you'd stopped noticing, and noticing it again is somehow important. You hold your hands in the basin longer than necessary, feeling the warmth work into the knuckles, into the stiffness there, and for 30 seconds you're just a body being warm, not a courtier being strategic, not a second son building a future. Then you dry your hands and dress. Wednesday mornings at Versailles have a particular rhythm. With the formal ceremonies lighter, more of the day is given to the informal circulation that is actually, in many ways, more important than the ceremonial parts. This is when the real conversations happen, the ones without an official structure around them. The ones where you can say the things you need to say without the entire hierarchy of the court watching you say them. The first of the Vicomtesse's 3 names, a man named Berthelot. Not a noble, a financier, one of the men who manages the considerable financial complexity of running a court at this scale. Not the most exciting contact for a young man trying to secure a military appointment, but the Vicomtesse had said he was connected to Louvois' financial operations, and Louvois is the Minister of War, and the Minister of War's financial operations are very close to the Minister of War. Berthelot is in the rooms near the finance offices, which are in a part of the palace that courtiers of your type don't often visit. Not because it's restricted, but because it doesn't occur to most of them that the men who make the money work might be as important as the men who spend it visibly. The finance offices smell of ink and paper, and the particular mineral smell of coin. The corridors here are narrow and practical, stripped of the theatrical grandeur of the main apartments. The people moving through them are moving quickly, carrying papers, having abbreviated conversations, doing the work of a functioning government rather than performing the appearance of one. You feel, in this section of the palace, a slightly different kind of pressure. Less of the social anxiety, more of the functional anxiety. The sense that things are actually happening here. Decisions being made, numbers being calculated that will determine who gets funded and who doesn't, and whose regiment gets resupplied before winter. Berthelot's assistant intercepts you at the door to the outer office. Monsieur de Fontenay, Monsieur Berthelot is occupied until noon. I don't need long. 10 minutes. The assistant looks at you with the specific expression of someone who hears 10 minutes, 15 times a day, and knows it always means more. He has an appointment. I know, I'll wait until he has a moment. The waiting room adjacent to the finance offices is less elaborate than the waiting rooms in the main apartments, which is to say it's a room with chairs and a window and no painted ceiling. You sit. The chair is hard wood, no cushion. You sit with the spine straight anyway, because there's no safe place to let your posture slip here. You wait. 20 minutes later, a man of 50 with ink on his cuff and the expression of someone permanently calculating something comes out of the inner office. De Fontenay, he says, not a greeting, a recognition, as if your name is a piece of information he's processing. Monsieur Berthelot, I appreciate the time. He gestures you in. The inner office is papers on every surface, organised in the way that only the person who organised them understands. A large table, 2 chairs, a window looking out on the utility wing. The Vicomtesse de Brehel mentioned your name, he says, sitting. She was kind enough to suggest the introduction. She's reliable in her recommendations. What do you need? Direct. Efficient. You appreciate it. I'm trying to understand the path to a commission. My family connection is through Cavaillon, who is connected to Louvois. I don't have any illusions about the speed of the process. I'm trying to understand what the process looks like. He looks at you with the same calculating expression. The process, he says carefully, involves Louvois being aware of your existence and being aware of it in a context that makes you easy to accommodate rather than difficult. Currently you're in the Cavaillon circle, which is good but not active. Cavaillon doesn't push requests, he just makes introductions. What you need is for someone closer to Louvois to know your name in a positive frame before Cavaillon makes his request. This is not new information, but having it confirmed by someone who actually knows the mechanism is worth the wait. Who is closer to Louvois right now, he considers. The pause is real. He's actually thinking rather than performing thought. The Abbé de Fourcy handles some of his correspondence. He's approachable, unlike most of Louvois' immediate circle, and there's a colonel, Beaumont in the engineering corps, who has Louvois' ear on personnel questions. Different kind of relationship. 2 more names. You commit them to memory. Thank you. Is there anything I can do that would be useful to you? He looks at you again. The calculating look. Then something shifts slightly. A recognition, perhaps, of the directness. There's a matter of some property assessments in Languedoc that I need someone reliable to verify information about. Someone who knows the region. He pauses. Not urgent. But if you have knowledge of the estates in the Narbonne area, I do. Then perhaps we'll have a reason to talk again. You stand. The 10 minutes have been 5. Thank you, Monsieur Berthelot. Don't thank me. Be useful. Back in the corridor you move quickly, processing. The morning is working. The connections are building. Beaumont in the engineering corps, the Abbé de Fourcy, added to the 2 names from last night's apartment, added to the Abbé Fortin, added to de la Salle, added to the Vicomtesse. Your network is taking shape. It's fragile. It's provisional. But it exists. The rest of Wednesday moves with purpose. You find the Abbé de Fourcy. This takes 40 minutes of careful navigation because his schedule is less fixed than Berthelot's, and the palace's informal geography requires knowing which routes people take between their appointments. But you find him correctly, near the chapel exit at the time you'd calculated he'd be passing through. The conversation is shorter than this morning's, just an introduction, A brief exchange, the minimum required to make a name real. But he's polite, and his eyes do the calculation that everyone's eyes do, and the result isn't negative. "I'll remember the name," he says. "That's what you needed." The afternoon gives you the third of the Vicomtesse's names, an old general, retired from active service, who holds a ceremonial position at court and who, it turns out, was at Rochefort the same season as your father's cousin. The connection creates a conversational opening that lasts 40 minutes and results in a genuine friendliness that surprises you. "Your cousin was a good man," the general says. He's settled into a chair near the fire in a small salon that seems to be semi-officially his, based on the way no one sits in it when he's present. His leg is bad. You've noticed the way he settles into chairs, the careful arrangement of it. But his eyes are sharp, the eyes of a man who has spent decades reading terrain and people with equal precision. Reckless but good. Saved 3 men from a burning building and then complained about his coat getting singed. You think about your family and feel, for the first time in 31 days, something warm. Very Fontenay sort of behaviour, apparently. Very. He looks at you with a directness that's different from the courtier's calculating assessment. This is the directness of a man who spent his life in situations where bad information could get people killed, and who learned to look straight at things as a result. "What do you need here, boy?" The bluntness of it startles a genuine answer out of you. A commission, something in a regiment, anything with Louvois' approval and salary attached. He nods. No performance of consideration. He's already decided something. "Come and see me again next week. I have a conversation scheduled with someone in that office, and your name is easy enough to add. You stand when you leave, and the hallway outside is somehow brighter than it was. That evening you eat supper in your rooms, bread and a small pot of soup that Pierre has obtained from somewhere, something with root vegetables and broth that smells of honest cooking, the kind of thing your mother's kitchen produces in autumn, and you feel, for the first time in a long time, something that isn't anxiety or calculation, or the sustained effort of being precisely who you need to be in this place. You write to Cavaillon, a brief note, delivered to wherever in the palace he's expected to arrive Thursday, reminding him of your existence and your appointment and the petition you need to discuss. You make the note warm without being desperate, specific without being demanding. Pierre takes it down. You sleep better Wednesday night than you've slept in a month. Not long. The palace wakes you at some point before 5 with routine sounds of its machinery. But deeper, the sleep of someone whose mind has briefly agreed to stop calculating. Thursday comes clear and cold. The kind of October morning that carries the feeling of something about to happen. Not because anything has changed, but because your expectation of change has been building toward this day for so long that Thursday itself feels different. The light looks different. The same corridors feel slightly altered. You dress with more care than usual, not extravagantly. You can't afford extravagance, and extravagance would be wrong anyway, a signal of overconfidence or poor judgment about your position. But carefully, the best available, every detail checked. Pierre brushes your coat twice. He ties your cravat, and you redo it. The small ritual of a man preparing for the most important conversation he's had in months. You check the mirror, then check it again. "Monsieur Cavaillon's man was here early," Pierre says. "He says Monsieur le Marquis arrived last night and will be in the Salon d'Abondance from 10. 10 o'clock. You have 3 hours. 3. You use one of them at the lever. Today it's fuller. Cavaillon's return has probably brought others back. the Wednesday rhythm giving way to the Thursday energy of the court at its more complete. The antechambers are dense with people. De La Salle is there again. He gives you the nod of someone who has tracked the progress of a situation he started. Cavaillon's back, he says. I know. How are you feeling? Prepared. He looks at you with the assessment look, then not unkindly. Good. The lever proceeds. Today you're admitted one stage further than before. A grace of timing and positioning, and the fact that the Abbé de Fourcy, who you spoke to yesterday, is moving through the room and catches your eye and includes you in the group he's walking with, which carries you through a door you wouldn't have reached on your own. You're not in the bedchamber. You're not in the cabinet de la garde-robe. You're in the outer antechamber of the first entrée space, a room removed from the king's actual person but still inside the inner perimeter. And from here you can see. The door to the cabinet stands half open. Through it, from this angle, you can see a portion of the room. Not the chair, not the king, but the back of the man standing nearest the door. And through the gap, a rectangle of light from the cabinet's single window, and the edge of what might be a shoulder in deep blue. Not close enough, but closer. You exist in this room for 20 minutes, while the lever proceeds in its stages. You speak to no one. Wrong moment for it. You observe. You file every detail. Who is in this room? Who moves through which door? How the hierarchy expresses itself in the organization of bodies in space. A minister's aide exits the cabinet with a quick, contained energy that suggests he's just delivered a piece of information and received a response and needs to act on it immediately. He passes through the antechamber without acknowledging anyone. The energy around him has the specific charge of business completed. A man you don't recognize enters the cabinet with the specific posture of someone who belongs there. Back straight, pace controlled, the walk you've been studying and practicing in the privacy of your slanted rooms. The morning turns over. At 10:10 you withdraw from the antechambers and make your way to the Salon d'Abondance. The Marquis de Cavaillon is 58 years old and looks it in the way that powerful men look their age, which is to say that the age is present, but it doesn't diminish the quality of power, just changes its texture. He's white-haired, heavy-set, with hands that were built for some outdoor life he ended up not having, and that now hold wine glasses and signed documents. He has the court face, the one that shows nothing unless he decides to show it. He sees you when you enter. He doesn't signal to you. That would be wrong. Too obvious a connection when people are watching. But his eyes register your presence with a slight warm adjustment. You give him time. 15 minutes. You speak with 2 other people, politely and briefly. You let the room's natural circulation bring you toward him. Fontenay. Monsieur le Marquis, I hope the journey from the country was not too tiring. The roads are abominable. They're always abominable. I've been saying this for 20 years and the roads continue to be abominable. He pauses. You look well. Better than your letter suggested. You wrote that the situation was progressing. Not that it had progressed. The week was productive. He looks at you carefully. He's known you since you were 12, in the way that men in your father's circle know children, not intimately, but with the particular quality of attention given to the futures of promising younger sons. He knows your family. He owes your father something. The weight of that obligation is what you're here for. The commission situation, he says, low voice. Yes. Louvois is occupied with the revocation matter. He means the Edict of Nantes, revoked just last month. The decision that has upended the position of French Protestants and is generating enormous administrative and political complexity for everyone involved in government. His attention is not easily gained right now. I know. I've been thinking about that. You tell him about Berthelot, about the property assessments in Languedoc, about the minor useful thing you can do for someone in Louvois' financial orbit that might create an opening rather than requiring one. Cavaillon listens. His expression changes slightly. The change that comes when someone realizes you've done more thinking about a problem than they expected. Berthelot said this. He indicated it. He was careful not to make a direct offer. He's always careful. A pause. That's actually sensible. If you make yourself useful to Berthelot on the Languedoc matter, he'll speak to de Forcy, and de Forcy speaks to Louvois directly. I've already met de Forcy. Another shift. In 3 days, he looks at you with something between amusement and respect. Your father raised an industrious boy. My father raised a second son. We learned to be industrious. Cavaillon laughs, a genuine brief laugh, the kind that happens when someone says something true and unexpected. All right, he says. Here's what I can do. I can speak to Louvois, not today. He's not receivable today, but by end of week. I'll frame you as someone who's already engaged with Berthelot's circle, which makes the request look less like a favour and more like an acknowledgement of an existing relationship. That's easier for him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Louvois is difficult, and the revocation is consuming everything right now, but the mechanism is there. He pauses, looks at you with the affection that older men sometimes have for young men who remind them of their own younger selves. How are you finding it? Versailles. The question has more depth than it appears to. Strange, you say, and beautiful, and violent in its way. In its way, he nods slowly. The violence here isn't physical. That's what takes time to understand. The weapons are different, but the wounds are just as real. You think about Morency's doorway, about 40 livres, cards, about the weight you've been carrying in your chest all week. I'm beginning to understand the weapons. He looks at you steadily for a moment. Good. You'll need to. This place will eat you alive if you give it the chance. He says it the way the Vicomtesse said it, the way the General said something like it, the way everyone who's been here long enough has said some version of it, the specific Versailles warning that veterans give to new arrivals. This place will eat you alive. And yet here you are. Here they are. Here everyone is. Because the alternative, not being here, not being part of this machine, not having any chance at the proximity to power that might change everything, is worse than the risk. I know, you say. Cavaillon nods, satisfied with something in your answer. Come and find me again tomorrow. I'll have more to tell you. You leave the salon and stop in the corridor. Out the window, the gardens stretch away to the west. The fountains are not running today. Too cold, probably. The statues stand in their positions, watching over the gravel paths with the blank intensity of stone. Somewhere in that palace behind you, in the specific small room where the business of an empire gets done in the most intimate possible setting, conversations have happened this morning that will determine the shape of kingdoms. You're not in that room, you're in a corridor. But for the first time since you arrived, you can see a path from here to there. Not a guaranteed path, not a short one, but real. That's what Thursday gave you. Let me tell you about the week that follows. Not in the detail of day by day, the repetition would blur it, but in the texture of it, the way the days stack up and what they deposit in you as they go. Friday brings a meeting with Beaumont, the engineering colonel that Berthelot mentioned. Beaumont is lean and military precise, a man who has spent his career moving through a world of exact measurements and applied force, and who brings that quality to every conversation. He looks at you the way you look at a landscape when you're planning something that requires it, assessing terrain, calculating distances, estimating difficulty. Fontenay, he says, engineering background? No, sir, commercial and legal. Useful in different ways. He doesn't say this dismissively. He says it the way you say it when you're actually filing information, rather than making a judgment. The conversation is brief and direct, and at the end of it he says, I'll remember you when something appropriate comes up. Not a promise, but a statement of intention from a man who looks like he follows through on statements of intention. Saturday, you attend Mass in the chapel. The chapel at Versailles is itself a statement. Vaulted, light-filled, with the King's Gallery above and the court below, and the sense of divine architecture making its argument about the relationship between heaven and the crown. You pray with the genuine attention of someone who has things to pray about, and the genuine attention feels appropriate for a space that demands it. Sunday is meant for rest. You rest imperfectly, the way everyone at Versailles rests imperfectly, because rest here is impossible to fully achieve when the machine is always running in the background. You walk in the gardens in the afternoon, the far end past the Grand Canal, where the crowd thins and the scale of the gardens becomes almost vertiginous, the perspective lines converging toward a horizon that seems impossibly far away. The autumn light is extraordinary out here, low and golden, casting long shadows from the trees. The bare branches of the deciduous trees make patterns against the sky. The evergreen topiary holds its perfect geometric shapes against the disorder of season. You think about home, not with homesickness, not exactly, but with the particular awareness of distance that comes when you've been away long enough to have stopped feeling the distance every day, and started feeling it only when something specific triggers it. The smell of damp stone and decaying leaves is nothing like Languedoc. Languedoc smells of thyme and salt and the specific dry warmth of limestone country, but the way the light falls at this hour is similar. The Mediterranean angle of autumn light, low and lateral and golden. You're further north than home, but the latitude is close enough to make the light familiar. You stand at the far end of the Grand Canal and look back toward the palace. From this distance, probably 3 kilometers, maybe more, it's a line of buildings against the sky. You can't see the detail, can't see the windows or the gold ornaments or the hall of mirrors, just the silhouette, the shape of the thing. And it's extraordinary that this thing exists, that human beings conceived of it and built it and filled it with 10,000 people and turned it into the mechanism it is. Extraordinary and alarming, and despite everything, genuinely beautiful. You'll remember this view for the rest of your life, standing at the end of the canal in October, looking back at Versailles. Monday. A conversation with de Forcy that moves past introduction into something approaching substance. He asks your opinion on a question of ecclesiastical jurisdiction in the southern provinces, a question you're not an expert on, but can speak to with reasonable intelligence, having grown up surrounded by the specific complications of church and state in Languedoc, where the particular mix of Protestant and Catholic history gives the question a texture it doesn't have in Paris. He listens with genuine interest, makes a note. I'll want to speak with you further about this, he says. Indispensable to 3 people. You're not there yet, but you're building. Tuesday, a week after the Morency incident, you encounter him again, this time in the corridor near the Salon d'Apollon, which is almost exactly where the original incident happened. He sees you first. You see him see you. There's a moment, a fraction of a second, where the memory of last Tuesday is between you, visible and acknowledged. Then you incline your head, the correct angle, the clean, unambiguous gesture of a man who knows the hierarchy and respects it, and is not going to pretend last week didn't happen. Renzi looks at you, then he nods, brief, small, but real. You step aside. He passes through the corridor, not forgiven, not befriended, but neutralized. You stand for a moment and let out a breath you've been holding, off and on since last Tuesday. The terrain has stabilized. That afternoon, Cavaillon sends a note, brief, handwritten in his slanted script. Louvois has been informed of your presence and your connection to Berthelot's project. No commitment, but the name is in play. The name is in play. You read the note 3 times, and then fold it carefully and put it in the small wooden box where you keep the documents that matter. The name is in play, which means the machine has engaged, the request has been made, the slow grinding of the court's processes is working on your behalf, however imprecisely, however uncertainly. It could still come to nothing. Most things at Versailles come to nothing. The men who've been here 15 years without securing their appointment are here for a reason, and the reason is not that they failed to put the right names in play. Sometimes the machine just doesn't produce. The right person dies. The minister changes his mind. The war changes the available positions. You know all of this, and you feel, despite knowing all of this, a lightness that has been absent for the past 37 days. You go to the apartment that Tuesday evening and stand near the right door, and when the king comes through the room, you're in the correct position and the correct posture, and he passes within 4 feet of you, and he does not look at you. And it's fine, because this is how it works. You build the position, you maintain it, you stay present and correct and useful and connected, and then, when the time is right, which is to say, when the specific constellation of circumstances that makes action possible aligns, you act. The time is not right yet, but the ground is being prepared. The weeks continue. The days have a structure now that 37 days ago was chaos. You know the lever days and the off days. You know which corridors are busy at which hours. You know 3 servants by name who are useful to know, and 2 secretaries who can tell you things, and 4 courtiers who are close enough to important people to be worth maintaining. The network is real. The Berthelot project, the Languedoc property assessments, turns out to involve more complexity than Berthelot initially indicated, which is probably why he was willing to involve an outside person. You write 3 detailed letters to your father's estate manager, asking specific questions about the estates in question, and the responses when they come give you information that Berthelot finds genuinely useful. He says so directly, which is as close to gratitude as Berthelot gets. The Languedoc data is better than we had. I've passed it on. To de Forcy, to Louvois' circle. The name continues to circulate. November arrives. The gardens lose their last leaves. The fountains are shut down for winter. The palace turns inward. The outdoor life of summer replaced by the interior life of candles and fires, and the particular pressure cooker atmosphere of 10,000 people spending more time inside. The cold is a fact of life now. You've bought a second blanket for the attic room and a better coat from a tailor in the palace's commercial zone, and the investment was necessary even though it strained the budget. because being seen in an inadequate coat in November is a social signal you can't afford. The budget is being managed carefully. Your father has sent additional funds, more than he should have sent probably, and the combination of these and your own careful spending has kept you solvent, not comfortable. Solvent. The gambling sessions, there have been 3 since the Morency game. You've played with great discipline, losing small amounts, never enough to be conspicuous, never enough to genuinely hurt. Cards at Versailles are not about the cards. They're about being present in the rooms where they're played. One evening in November, perhaps 6 weeks after your arrival, you attend an apartment where the music in the Salon de Mars is particularly good. A harpsichordist whose name you'll learn later, but who plays with a precision and warmth that cuts through the social noise and makes everyone in the room actually listen for a few minutes, actually present rather than performing presence. The music does something to the room, settles it. The usual calculation drops slightly, the way a hand of cards lays flat on the table when nobody's gripping it. People just listen, and the listening connects them briefly in the way that music connects people when the performance is good enough. The king stops near you to listen. You are aware of this with every nerve in your body. He stops approximately 6 feet to your right, and he listens to 4 measures of the harpsichord, and his face does something that it rarely does in public. It relaxes, just slightly. The performance drops for 4 measures, and there's a man there, 50 years old, who's been carrying the weight of France his entire conscious life. And for 4 measures he's just a man listening to music that he finds beautiful. Then the performance returns. He turns and continues through the room. He didn't speak to you, he didn't look at you, but you were there. You were present for those 4 measures of something true. At Versailles, that matters. Winter tightens. The basin of Latona freezes. The Grand Canal freezes and people skate on it. Not you don't have skates, but you walk down to watch, and it's the strangest and most beautiful thing you've seen since you arrived. The formal axis of the gardens converted into a skating rink. The geometric landscape used for joy rather than awe. Children pull each other in circles over the ice. An old man in court dress is sliding experimentally on the heels of his shoes with the expression of someone who has decided dignity can wait. The cold comes off the frozen surface in waves, clean and sharp, so different from the palace cold, which smells of stone and old wood and the accumulated breath of thousands. You stand and watch and think about Louis XIV, who commissioned this whole landscape, and who is right now, probably, sitting in the small cabinet with the padded chair while men tell him the things he needs to know to govern an empire in winter. The lever continues every morning. The ceremony reproduces itself with the reliability of a mechanical clock. Same movements, same sequence, same stations, same hierarchy expressing itself through the same precise ritual. You've been admitted to the inner antechamber 3 more times, not through political manoeuvring, not yet, but through the natural drift of improved positioning. You know more people know you. The geography of the lever has become legible, and when you know the geography you can navigate it. You've never been in the cabinet, but you've stood close enough on 2 occasions to see the king's profile in the doorway as he moved between rooms, close enough to see the particular quality of his gaze, direct, assessing, the gaze of a man who has been studied his entire life and learned to study in return. Close enough to hear, on one of those occasions, his voice, brief and low, saying something to the man beside him that you couldn't make out but whose tone you could read. Not impatient, not especially warm, just steady. The voice of someone who has been deciding things for 30 years and has made his peace with the weight of it. The machine is grinding. It grinds slowly, as it always does, but it grinds. December. The court at Versailles in December is both more beautiful and more desperate than at other times. More beautiful because the decoration is extraordinary. The palace dressed for Christmas by people with unlimited budgets and perfectionist masters. The candles multiplied beyond even their usual excess. Fresh greenery cut from the gardens and brought inside so that the corridors smell for once of something living and clean. More desperate because the pressure of the year's end concentrates ambition. People who've been waiting for appointments, waiting for decisions, waiting for the moment of royal favour that will justify everything. They feel the year closing and they push harder. You feel it too. The pressure of time, but you've learned enough in these 9 weeks to know that pushing is usually wrong. The correct response to the year's end pressure is to maintain the position you've built rather than overreaching for something that isn't ready yet. Cavaillon has been a reliable presence in your orbit, mentioning your name when he should, making the small interventions that keep you visible in the right circles. He's not doing this out of pure altruism. The Montpellier obligation, the debt, is part of the calculation. But he's doing it competently, and that's what matters. De Forcy has become something approaching an actual relationship. Not close. He's 30 years older and far more established, but functional in both directions. The third real conversation 2 weeks ago moved into territory that wasn't purely instrumental. A discussion of Languedoc's religious situation after the revocation, of what it looks like from inside the affected communities, a subject on which you have personal knowledge and he has political need. He thanked you, directly. This is useful. You understand things about the provinces that people who've only lived at court don't understand. That's rare and valuable. Rare and valuable. You thought about the Abbé Fortin's advice. Indispensable to 3 people before anyone has decided to act against you. You think you're close to that. Beaumont, the engineering colonel. The connection hasn't developed into a real relationship yet, but you've had 4 brief conversations, and the 4th was the most substantive. He asked a technical question about something in the engineering reports from the southern fortifications, a subject adjacent to your region, and your answer was useful enough that he said he'd be in touch. His assistant found you the following day with a specific follow-up question. That's not nothing. That's the beginning of a thread. The web is there. December 10th. The anniversary of nothing in particular, but a day when you wake up and realise that you've been here 71 days and you no longer feel like a newcomer. Not because you've achieved anything definitive. You haven't. You're still in the attic rooms, still on the margins of the rooms that matter, still waiting. But you know the place. You know its rhythms and its dangers and its rewards and its specific beauty. You know the smell of the corridors at 5 in the morning and the sound of the leather antechambers building to capacity and the way the king walks through a room and the effect this has on everyone in it. You know the cabinet de la garde-robe, not from inside it, from the antechamber, from the doorway glimpsed at the right angle on the right morning, but you know what happens there. You understand why it happens. You see, with a clarity that 71 days of patient study has built, how it fits into the whole. Let me describe it to you one more time, because it's important, and because you understand it differently now than you did at the beginning. The chaise percée sat in that small cabinet like an ordinary piece of furniture. and when the king used it, the men who were admitted stood approximately 4 feet away, which is the distance at which private conversation is possible, and they spoke to him about the things that mattered. A petition regarding a regiment, a piece of information from the German border, a request made quietly, without the formality of a written submission, in the kind of easy tone that the setting somehow permitted. Because here's what actually happened in that room, the thing beneath the ceremony. The king listened differently in there, in the Grand's apartments, the formal audiences, the lever. He listened with one layer of the performance always running, the king listening rather than the man listening. In the cabinet, with the curtailed grandeur and the enforced physical practicality of the situation, something in the performance dropped. Not entirely. It never dropped entirely. Louis XIV was incapable of being entirely off, but enough. Enough that the men who came to him there reported consistently in their memoirs and letters that they felt heard in a way that the formal audiences didn't quite produce. The king was reduced, temporarily, symbolically, in the way that any person is reduced by the inescapable routines of the body, and in that reduction, something became possible that the gold ceilings and the mirrors and the levered ceremony couldn't quite achieve: actual contact, not just with the petitioner's request. With the petitioner. That's what the room was for. Not efficiency, contact. And men would do anything to be in it. You stand in the antechamber on a December morning and you wait. The door to the cabinet is half open. Someone comes out. The man has the specific quality of energy that comes from having had a successful conversation, the released tension, the organized purpose. He moves through the room and is gone. Someone else goes in. The morning machine turns over, and you wait. You wait with the patient, calculated, full attention of someone who has learned over 71 days that waiting here is not passive, that the position you hold in the antechamber on the right morning in the right way, this too is doing something, building, always building. Someday, not today, but someday, the door will open and someone will look out and speak your name, and you will walk through, and the morning light will come through the cabinet's single window, and you will stand before the king, and in that small, human, absurd and perfect room, something will happen that changes the shape of what comes next. You can't know when. You can't force when. But you're here. You've made yourself real in this place. The machine has you in it now, and the machine is running. The December light comes through the high windows of the antechamber and falls on the marble floor, and you stand in it, breathing slowly, waiting with the full alert patience of a man who has learned the difference between endurance and strategy. Evening comes over Versailles the way it always does in December, quickly, the light going from silver to gold to almost nothing in the space of an hour. The candles are lit, all of them, hundreds of them, and the palace transforms. The marble floors catch the candlelight and hold it. The mirrors multiply it into something enormous. The hall of mirrors at this hour, if you're lucky enough to walk through it in the right moment with the right number of candles burning, produces an effect that no architecture before or since has quite repeated. The sense of being inside light itself, the light bouncing between the windows and the mirrors, the cold December garden darkening on one side while the golden glass on the other side blazes. You walk through it on your way back to your wing. Your coat is the blue one. It's getting slightly worn at the cuffs, you notice. A detail you should address before it becomes visible to anyone important. The note joins the long list of small domestic things you're maintaining alongside the large strategic ones. The hall of mirrors at this hour is almost empty, a few people moving through on their way somewhere. You have the length of it essentially to yourself, and you walk it at the pace it demands. The unhurried, deliberate pace, the spine straight, the step placed, and you look at yourself in the mirrors as you pass. There's a reflection, small at first, near the far entrance, and growing as you walk toward it, and then past itself, the reflection receding behind you while a new one advances ahead. You in blue, slightly worn at the cuffs, in the Hall of Mirrors in December of 1685, second son, provincial noble, 71 days into the longest project of his life. The mirrors multiply you into infinity in both directions. Smaller and smaller versions of yourself retreating toward the vanishing point. This one specific moment of your existence repeated until it disappears. You'll remember this, you think. Whatever happens with the appointment, whatever Louvois decides, whatever the machine of Versailles produces or doesn't produce, you'll remember this walk through the Hall of Mirrors on this specific December evening, the candles burning in their sconces, and the dark garden on one side, and the infinite corridor of light on the other. The thought anchors something. Outside the windows, the gardens are winter dark. The fountains are silent. The statues stand in the cold with their usual indifference to weather and season, and the ambitions of passing humans. You reach the far end of the hall and pass through the door. Your rooms are waiting. Pierre will have the fire built up. There will be bread and something else. He's become a better forager over the weeks, finding the suppliers in the palace's commercial zones who give reasonable goods at reasonable prices. The stairs, the corridor, the slanted door, your rooms. Pierre looks up from the fire. The room is warm, warm enough, which is its own kind of achievement. The small space holds the heat better than you expected when you first saw it. The low ceiling and the thick walls doing the work that no amount of grandeur in the design could have done. The bread is on the table. There's a small pot of something soup-like that smells of broth and root vegetables, and at this moment, in this cold December evening, it smells like the best thing you've encountered in weeks. You sit, you eat. The sounds of the palace drift up through the floorboards and the walls. The ordinary evening sounds, the distant music of the apartment starting up somewhere in the main wing, the horses in the stable below your courtyard being settled for the night. You eat the soup and you feel, for the first time in a long time, something that isn't anxiety or calculation. You feel fine. The soup is plain but hot. The bread is 2 days old but filling. The fire is small but adequate. Fine is enough. Pierre clears the table and retreats to his cot. He's asleep within minutes. 17 years old, he sleeps the way young people sleep, completely and immediately, no regard for what tomorrow holds. You sit by the dying fire a while longer. Think about the things you've learned, about doorways and their protocols, about the weight of a coin pressed into the right hand at the right moment, about the specific posture that communicates rank without performance, about the difference between watching someone and being seen watching someone, about what it costs to be present in this place, not just in money, though the money is real, but in the constant expenditure of attention, the careful management of impression, the sustained effort of being exactly and precisely who you need to be every hour of every day. Think about what you've built in 71 days. The names, the connections, the meetings, the small useful things you've done for people who can reciprocate. Think about the cabinet de la garde-robe, the door half open, the light from the single window, the shoulder in deep blue. Think about Louis XIV, who invented all of this. Who built this machine to solve a problem that had almost destroyed him, and who built it so well that he disappeared into it? The man and the monarchy so completely fused that by this point in his reign, 57 years old, 44 years of personal rule, the performance and the performer are genuinely indistinguishable. There's something both admirable and terrible about that. The fire dies down to coals, orange and steady in the grate. The sound of them, the faint creak and settle of wood gone to heat and ash, is one of the quietest sounds in the palace, and therefore one of the most distinctive. You don't feed the fire, let it go. The room will be cold by morning, but you'll have the blanket, and by morning the fire can be restarted and the day will have its own warmth. Tomorrow is another day of building, but not tonight. Tonight is just the coals in the grate, the sound of Pierre breathing on his cot, the distant palace alive in its complicated evening ways, the winter cold pressing against the window glass. Tonight is just rest. The kind of rest that a body earns after a week of carrying the weight of its own ambition through the most demanding social landscape in the world. You lie down. The bed. The mattress you've known for 71 nights. Every lump and hollow familiar now. The topography of this particular experience. You know exactly where to put your shoulder to avoid the hard place near the seam. You know the exact weight of the blanket, the way it settles over you like a specific kind of certainty. Not warmth yet, just the promise of warmth that will build as the minutes pass. The ceiling above you, plain plaster, the water stain in the corner that's been there since you arrived and will be there long after you leave. Through the window, very faint, the moonlight on the service courtyard. The shape of the cart that's always parked there. Slightly different angle tonight. Your eyes close. The sounds of Versailles filter down through the winter dark. Distant, muffled, continuous. The palace never fully stops. Someone is always moving. Someone is always at work. The kitchen begins its 3 a.m. preparations somewhere deep in the building. A bass note of activity that never quite goes silent. The lamplighters make their rounds. The night soil men do the work that allows 10,000 people to live in a space that was never designed to hold them all. Carrying out what the day has left behind, the ordinary unglamorous labour that keeps the machine of splendour functional. The machine runs, and you rest inside it, carried by it, constrained by it, trying to make something from it. 22 years old in December of 1685 in the attic of the south wing of the Palace of Versailles. Second son, provincial noble. Somewhere in the main block, behind the walls and the marble corridors and the hall of mirrors, behind the grand bedchamber and its gilt balustrade and its painted ceiling, behind all of that, a small cabinet with a padded chair and a single window, and the accumulated meaning of decades of ceremony. The place where, tomorrow morning, the king will sit and the men will come and the business of an empire will be conducted in the most human possible setting. The place you're working toward. It gets closer every day. Not by much. By the increment of each meeting, each connection, each careful positioning in the right antechamber on the right morning. But it gets closer. Sleep is coming in from the edges. The way it always comes when you're truly tired. Not fighting it, but not quite surrendering either. The slow dissolve, thought by thought, until the thoughts stop being sequential and start becoming something else. The pre-dream state where the palace and the home you came from and the future you're building blur together into images that don't quite make sense, but feel significant. The cabinet de la garde-robe, your father's estate in the morning light, the hall of mirrors empty, the candles all out, just moonlight through 17 windows and your reflection in 357 mirrors, getting smaller and smaller until you disappear into the distance. The king's profile in a doorway. The sound of the lever beginning, the first bell, the first movement of the machine. Let it come. Let the sleep take what it came for. The thoughts slow and soften. The sounds of the palace grow faint. The fire is out in the grate. The room is cool and dark and yours. You've earned this rest. You've earned it 31 days over, 71 times over, one careful day at a time. Take it. Versailles will be there in the morning. The lever will proceed. The cabinet door will stand half open. The work will continue, but not now. Now just this. A body at rest. A mind finally quiet. The long winter night of 1685 stretching over the palace and the gardens and the frozen fountains and the statues standing in their places in the dark. Centuries will pass. This building will survive them and be transformed by them and survive again. The machine of absolute monarchy will break down, eventually, catastrophically, in a revolution that the grandson of the man sleeping in the state bedchamber tonight will not survive. The monarchy will return and break down again. The palace will be stripped and looted and survive and become a museum, and millions of people will walk through the hall of mirrors with their phones out, and they will stand in the small cabinet off the bedchamber and read a placard explaining what happened there, and they will try to imagine it. But they will be tourists looking at a room. You are living in one. The human beings who built this place and filled it and struggled inside it, their ambitions are as real as yours, their anxieties as real, their relief at the end of a hard day, their hope at the beginning of a new one, their small victories and smaller defeats in the enormous complicated machine of a court at the height of its power. They were here. You are here. The human heart doesn't change across the centuries. The need for rest at the end of a day of building something important, that doesn't change. The longing to be seen by the right eyes and have that seeing mean something, that doesn't change. The strange, stubborn, slightly irrational hope that if you position yourself correctly and wait with sufficient patience, something good might actually happen. That doesn't change. Some things don't change. So rest. Let the sounds of Versailles grow faint. Let the weight of all the names and conversations and positions drift away into the dark. Let your hands uncurl from the thing they've been holding all day. Let your breath slow. Let the ambitious boy from Languedoc sleep in his attic room with the cold window and the dying fire and the work that will be there in the morning. He's done enough for today. So have you. Warm enough, fed enough, safe enough, close enough. Close enough is not nothing. Close enough is where all beginnings live. Good night.